All right, let's move on to document 32A. This is just some of the difficult things we have to talk about. The sexualization of society. Unfortunately, societies tend to become sexualized. And when they become sexualized, then almost everything that happens has a sexual content. It's just so unfortunate. It's sad we have to talk about it, but unfortunately we do. So I think we were on the second page there, on the back of the page. We were talking about how school has become the national parent and also how television has become the national babysitter. And we were talking about the way we think about our parents. If we are raised in a home where mom and dad stay together, we tend to think in terms of dad being the provider and mother being the nurturer. We think of dad going to work or farming. We think about mother as making the food and chocolate chip cookies and all those kinds of things. But if a child grows up, as some of you work with children in broken homes, or dad's out chasing some other ladies and mom's got boyfriends, the children don't grow up with those thoughts. They grow up with the thoughts of their parents being sexual creatures. We don't tend to think of that in a good, solid home. But unfortunately, what's happened to the American society is that they think of the children think of the parents as being sexual. And because of that, the children are getting into these behaviors way too early. Okay, so that's kind of where we ended there yesterday. The next subject was language, coarse and suggestive language, commonplace even among believers. I've not done this at SMBI, but I did it at school one time. I just started a chapel by saying, today I'm going to offend you and I'm going to offend me, but there are some words I need to talk to you about. I've never done that here, but I hear the words here. Be careful about the words that you adopt from the society. Words that become so much a part of the society, but have really covertly and sometimes overtly sexual implications. Please don't use those words. Don't use words that, if you don't know what they mean, or just because they've become part of society, that's not a reason to use the word. So I'm not going to do it here, all right? Maybe next year, maybe never. I don't know. But please watch your language. It's so offensive to hear people use coarse and suggestive language, and it becomes a part of the way we think and the way we talk, and it's just so unfortunate. Movies and video type games filled with sexuality. I just realized that people my age don't realize what children are doing. Okay, many of these video type games, console games, and you know all about them. I'm not going to start listing them, but incredibly laced with sexuality. And you're getting little children, I mean young children, playing these games and introduced to these concepts and pictures that is just becoming very, very destructive. Teaching that overemphasizes women's attire. Lois and I, we talk about this sometimes and say that in our growing up days, we heard so much talk to the ladies about how they need to dress. And the idea was that if they don't dress properly, then it causes trouble for the men. And we just heard this, I think I would have heard it twice a year for most of my growing up. There were certain times when these subjects were addressed. And, I agree that women need to dress modestly. But when you overemphasize this, when it's just constantly the subject of the messages, what it's doing is putting the weight of the responsibility on the ladies. And I want the ladies to dress modestly, but I spend almost no time talking about, how ladies should dress. I understand it's important, but my question is, when are we going to talk to the men? And I want the ladies to dress modestly. I want men to dress modestly. I want us to teach our children to dress modestly. But we cannot make the ladies responsible for the men's behavior. That is just inappropriate. It is just wrong. And teaching that, I think, has led us down a path where we made the women responsible for almost everything. Okay? And that said, I really don't want to have to face the kind of temptation that Joseph faced in Egypt. I don't want to do that. I don't ever want to get in a place where I've got to face that on a regular basis. But if I do, the Bible tells me how to behave. Is that right? The Bible tells me, look, here was Joseph. It's put in a context where why wouldn't he do wrong? Why wouldn't he? He doesn't even know anything about where his family is. He doesn't know if his dad's still alive. He's been oppressed and abused and uncared for. And here's an opportunity. And he says, I can't do this. Okay. So no matter how the ladies dress, and I'm not giving them an excuse to dress incorrectly or inappropriately or immodestly, but it's time for us men to say, look, no matter what, we're going to do right. We're not going to be exploitive. We're not going to be thinking wrongly. It's time to talk to the men. Sometimes books that purport to teach integrity really advertise sinful behavior. I know we talked about this a little bit, and some of these books that are, designed to teach the way to live and how to behave, especially for men, sometimes they have examples in there that I, as I told you before, would be embarrassed to read in front of a group. I'm embarrassed to read it in the quietness of my office, okay? Because I don't want those thoughts in my mind. I really don't want them in there. Because when I see those things on print, when I read a book like that, to me it becomes a test. And I've got to say, no, I'm not going to allow those thoughts to take me down this path, okay? And so even teaching about some of these subjects, we have to be very careful because the teaching can sort of advertise the problem. Okay, pornography. This gets worse as we go here. Images that incite improper sexual responses, creates false intimacy. What really happens here is when people see pornography, when men see pornography, there's several things that happen. First of all, it creates a sense of false intimacy. It's like, well, here's this person on a screen or on your camera, on your cell phone screen, or on a magazine page or something of that sort, and it looks like intimacy. It makes men feel like aggressors, but the truth is it really makes them victims. Okay? While it makes men feel aggressive, it really makes them victims. They're becoming victimized by their own sinful attraction to those images. And the reason they work, the reason pornography works, is because it sends a signal that that person is available. Okay, that's the signal that's being sent. Now, the truth is the person is not available. The picture is there, the image is there, the movie might be there, but the person is not really there. And when you really study into these things, and my study into this came in the 1980s when the President of the United States had the President's Commission on Pornography, and James Dobson was part of that, and he was putting this in the news, in the Christian news, and talking about what happens and why and trying to get rid of this. And so never did he bring any images into his reports, okay? Never. But some language and some reports of what some of the ladies who get involved in pornography, the people whose pictures are being taken, some of their testimonies. And I can tell you, if you hear the painful testimonies of some of those ladies, you'll cry. I did. And if you have any attraction to those images and you realize the pain behind them, it will, if you can't be touched with something like that, you probably cannot be touched. It just will put a knife in your heart to realize the pain behind what's going on with those images. So it creates a false sense of a perception of availability, but it's really not a reality, okay? And so we all send signals of availability. Let's just move out of this subject here a little bit into a general discussion. You come to Bible school and you want to talk to somebody, what you'll discover is either they do or do not send a signal of availability. If they smile, that's a signal. I'm going to be your friend. If they get closer to you, it's a signal they want to talk with you, okay? We send signals of availability. We do it every day, all day. And the idea is that it makes you available to somebody else to talk and become their friend. Well, in pornography, what happens is the signal of availability is being sent because of the way these girls and women are presenting themselves. So the signal, and when you think about it, the signal that somebody cares about you, that they're making themselves available to you, is a powerful signal. Agreed? That's powerful. I mean, if you're trying to get somebody's attention and they turn away, that sends a signal too, right? They're not making themselves available. Okay? Or they frown instead of smile, or they don't talk back, they don't return your comments. Those are signals, and we're sending these signals all the time. The signal of availability is so powerful, and it's one of the most powerful signals in dating and courtship, because here's somebody who wants you. They want your attention. They're smiling at you, they're calling you on the phone, they're sending you texts, they're writing you letters, they're All those kinds of things are signals of availability. And it just gives us that high, that important feeling, that feeling that we're needed, that we're cared for. And so when those signals are used in a wrong sense, like in pornography, men just almost cannot resist it, because the pose is, I'm available. And it's just like, boom. But we have to. What did we talk about yesterday? 2 parts to our brain. Is that right? We have the impulse part and we have the logic part. And something comes into the impulse part of our brain. Everything comes in to the impulse part of your brain. And when you see that, if you act out of that, you're many times going to do exactly what Achan did. He acted on the impulse. If Achan had stopped a bit to think, what am I going to do with this stuff I steal? Where was he going to use this gold and silver? What was he going to do with it? You couldn't buy anything with it because everybody will know where you got it. If he would have used a little bit of logic, he could have said, well, let's run this back here into the logic part of my brain that God's put there. And the same thing is true with men in pornography, okay? I see it. I go into a place of business and there's a calendar on the wall, right? Did I know it was there? No. Did I go looking for it? No. So I see it and it has that, impulse impact on my life. But then I say, wait a minute, that's not my wife. God's given me a wife to love. I have no right. That will destroy my life. That will cause me problems when I don't want problems. I cannot afford, my life is about teaching Bible and teaching many things. I cannot afford to have things in here that will cause that problem. I cannot afford to have things in my heart, things in my mind that will destroy the call of God in my life. And it will. It will. Interesting, went to the dentist some years ago, and he gave me my injection, which isn't really a lot of fun, and he's waiting for this to get my jaw numb. And so we're talking, and he's a friend, and so he was talking about what they're doing. They're cutting firewood for the winter, and okay, so I knew something about chainsaws. I was asking what kind of a chainsaw he has and what they do, and he started saying, wait, I don't use a chainsaw, and I don't stack wood. I'm wondering what he does. I guess he gives orders to other people to cut the wood and stack it. But he went on to say, I make my living with my fingers. He said, I cannot risk my fingers. He said, what if I lose a finger? He said, I'd be finished. He said, I cannot even afford, when you're stacking wood, sometimes you get your finger between the wood coming down and the wood on the pile, right? He said, I cannot even afford that, or I can't do my job. And so I'm there while he's drilling around in my mouth, and I have all this time to think because I can't talk, and he's not talking, right? And I'm thinking, you know what? That's a wise man. He will not jeopardize the important part of his body that he needs to do his task. And I'm thinking, you know what? I cannot jeopardize. If I'm a Bible teacher, I cannot afford to jeopardize my life. I cannot. I cannot afford to jeopardize my mind, my heart, my thinking. I cannot afford it. And nobody else can either, really, even if you're not a Bible teacher. But it's so important that we don't see these images that are designed to send a signal of availability. And yeah, it sends a signal to me, but I've got to process it very quickly, or I'm going to wind up over here somewhere. Okay? You can, men, and you must. Okay? Images that incite improper sexual responses, they create false intimacy. They create the false perception of availability. Those images reduce people to bodies and objects. They reduce girls to a collection of body parts. And nobody wants that. That is just something that's so ungodly. Types of pornography, and I don't talk a lot about this, but the soft core type is just people with little or maybe no clothing on. Hardcore images are people containing injury, blood, abuse, and death. And if you don't know this stuff exists, please don't go looking for it. It is so absolutely destructive. And people are getting into this. Men are getting into this kind of thing. It is just so unbelievably wicked. Kitty pornography, images of children. These stories are in the paper. A man I knew pretty well some years ago. He's still in prison, by the way. He was a minister, and he was involved in trying to get children into activities with himself, sexual activities. And he set up a time to meet a girl. And when he got there, he left his religious work and drove to a place in a mall where he's going to meet this girl. And it turned out it wasn't a girl. It turned out it was a sting operation. And the police flipped open their badges and said, "We're waiting for you." And he is in prison. Okay. This stuff is just so, so wicked. How can the devil throw these things at us? A man my age, now in prison, has a wife, has grown children. Can you imagine? The devil is throwing us some really bad material here, okay? Getting us to think in ways that are so destructive. Phone sex. I bumped into this at school. We started getting some really high phone bills. And I said, "What is this?" The secretary and I were talking about. I said, "Who is making these high bills?" "We don't know." So I called the company. I said, "Well, we don't remember these phone bills." Turns out when the school was rented out, some people were using the phones there. We had access to the phones. After a while, we had to curtail access to the phones. They were using the phones for phone sex, okay? Calling numbers where somebody would talk to you in really, really, really immoral ways. So I told my wife, "I'm going to make this call." I told the secretary, "I'm going to make this call." I sat down at my desk and I called this number, and I got this sleazy response from this girl. And I said, "Look, I don't know who you are, but somebody from our number is making calls to you. I just want you to know I'm not going to pay the bill." All of a sudden, she could talk normally, All of a sudden, she could talk English and quit talking the sleazy stuff, okay? She quit. I said, I don't know what you're doing, but I said, this is going to stop because I'm not going to pay the bill. So you get more calls from this number, do whatever you want to do, but you're not going to be paid. And that cured the problem, okay? So if there were more calls made, we never found it. But, this stuff is going on. And, it tells you something, that it tells you that the man's heart has a longing for connection, okay? Because on a phone, you can't see the person. I know on today's phones you can. But back those days, with the squiggly cord that was fastened to the box, I know that sounds like ancient history or something, but, there was no picture there. All it was an emotional attachment. And it tells me that men are not just visually oriented, or these people couldn't make a living with this kind of stuff on the phones. It tells me that men have a longing, to be able to talk to a woman in a way that gets her attention and gives him some attention. So, there are things to be learned here, but while there are things to be learned, it's just so important that we stay away from this stuff, okay? It literally will destroy us, okay? It's regressive behavior. Why is it regressive? Because it takes us back to an earlier stage, I know it's sensitive to talk about this. I know it's unpleasant to talk about it, but somebody's got to do it. And in my life, I waited until I was 50 years old to address some subjects. I wanted to have enough history behind my life before I addressed some subjects. I waited till I was 60 years old to address some other subjects. This is a subject that I did not address in teaching before I was 60 years old. I wanted to make sure. And that doesn't mean I'm beyond temptation. Doesn't mean that at all. I just wanted to make sure in my own life, though, that I had a history that would allow me to address the subjects, okay? And so, by the grace of God, this is not part of my life, nor has it ever been, okay? Nor do I intend that it ever will, okay? And I say that by the grace of God. It's regressive behavior because when you think, as little boys, we have access to our mother's body, and if you don't grow up, you still think you need access to women's bodies, besides the girl whom God has provided you for your wife, okay? And so, as I say, it's sensitive to talk about, but it's very regressive behavior. It's actually childish. It's actually very childish. And as I said, it makes men feel like aggressors, actually makes them victims. And if we can see that victimization, maybe it would help us to understand. It's actually creature worship, where you are elevating the female creature as something above God. It's actually a form of creature worship. The loss of characteristics of masculinity and femininity, in other words, acting like gentlemen and ladies, results in the emphasis on male and female bodies. So we talked about this before, we should be acting in masculine ways, we should be acting in feminine ways, and you don't need to display your body to do that. You can be masculine, you can be feminine without displaying bodies. But when we don't do that, then we tend to go back to the maleness and femaleness. Divorce and broken homes, we've talked about that one. Sexualization distorts perceptions of very young children, sets their self-concepts and their behaviors, and eventually destroys the fabric of society. The way in which little girls are being dressed is just really, really wrong, okay? When they're 4 and 6, being dressed to look like they're 16. Don't do that. We've been trying to be very careful with our children, that we dress them very appropriately, modestly, but make sure that we're not allowing them to go through life in a way where they're starting to think in terms of displaying their bodies. The Song of Solomon 3 times tells us, do not awaken love until the time is right. Nothing is wrong with sexuality in married love. That's part of life. That's an important part of life. But it's an important part of life that we wait for until God provides that for us. And don't awaken love until the time is right. 3 times the Song of Solomon says that. So we don't want to be introducing people to sexuality so early in life that they're unable to process, and that becomes the way they think about life. Feminism, this is a whole subject of its own. The first wave of feminism was to get women the right to vote. Second wave, in the 60s, equal rights and pay, and also reproductive freedom. The third wave, 1990 to the present, is where you get the aggressive, dominant women in powerful positions in industry, in business. And that doesn't mean women cannot be in business. Obviously, they can. Proverbs 31 makes that very clear. But you have them so dominant and so aggressive that you try and deal with these ladies, and they're pretty tough to deal with. They have to be tough, when they're in organizations where they're dealing with men all the time, and they've got to compete on the men's level in an organization, maybe in business, or even in education. Some of the ladies who are in public education, they get pretty far up the line. They've got to be really, really strong and tough. So we're going to be careful that the strengths don't become the girl power type of thing that's been popularized by feminism. We also see the feminization of men on this, where men, instead of being as masculine as they should, and we talked about this before, that the strength of a man, men tend to be stronger than women, but the strength is supposed to be used to protect, never to be aggressive against ladies, always to use that strength to protect, to guard, and make sure we do that. Sometimes men are dominated by women in a marriage. We talked about parent-adult-child here, and in the parent-adult-child approach, sometimes you'll get a marriage that works. That let's say the woman and the man, and the woman constantly talks to the man, parent to child, and the man becomes a child, and the entire marriage for a lifetime is dominated like that. And when you put men in that position, and when this man is not strong enough to do what he needs to do and be the man of the house, these men will tend to find other outlets for their sexual energies. And many times this is what happens. Focus on the Family says that the single most common phone call they get is from pastors who are caught in this problem, and they don't know what to do. And so there's a constant need for counseling, constant need for helping men understand what's going on so they don't get involved and find a way to meet needs outside of marriage. So the question, as I understand it, is how do you guide children in a blatantly sexual society? that's going to be a problem. It's going to be more of a problem. It's a problem already, and it's going to be more of a problem. Sometimes I see children at grade schools. I get around to schools, and I'll see children at grade schools with a lunchbox that's got maybe, I think the parents may buy them innocently or get them at a yard sale or something of that sort, but maybe a sweatshirt or a lunchbox that's got maybe a child actress on it or something like that, or maybe a professional athlete. I think that's just plain wrong. Okay, let's be careful we don't do that. I know along the way when our girls were little that maybe somebody gave us some dolls that had were dressed inappropriately, or maybe had their hair in curlers or something of that sort, and we just decided we're not going to have our girls play with dolls like that, and help them. We started a practice when our girls were young of wearing a pair of boy shorts under their dresses. Okay, little girls like to climb trees, fine. I'm not going to tell them they can't climb trees, but I'm going to have them dressed in a way. Like I said, it's a sensitive discussion, but we need to talk about it somewhere, sometime. And so, since I'm an old man, I've been talking about some of these things. So, let's take precautions. Let's be careful. Let's not be so sensitive to it that we're always talking about it, because there's two ways to destroy a teaching. One is to not do it, and the other one is to do it all the time. Okay, you can destroy something either way. So stay in there on the discussion. Try to make sure men and women, little boys, little girls, know what's modest, what's expected, what's not. It's going to be a serious problem, more serious than it is already. Romans 16:19, where Paul is talking to Romans here, and he says, I'm just going to read the last half of the verse, Romans 16:19. But I would have you wise unto that which is good and simple concerning the evil. He means be innocent about evil. So it's important that we keep our minds as innocent as possible relative to evil. So we don't want to find out, go looking into all the bad things that are out there to find out what's out there. So I try to be knowledgeable enough to be able to address the question that we just finished here. The other thing is, as I'm talking to men about the subject, which I do sometimes, still back on 32A here before we move to document 30, what I will tell them is, if you have something about which you need to talk, find one person to talk about it. Sometimes you get a group of people together and they're talking about this kind of sin. And, there are so many levels of pornography, so many levels of it. And sometimes people who are not involved in it can get interested in it just by hearing somebody else give their testimony. And so I try to keep those things, when I'm involved, I try and keep those things to a minimum. I'll say what I have to say. I'll say it as appropriately as possible. I'll say there are different levels here. Be careful what you're doing. Because entry levels are so dangerous because they take you into other levels. And after a while, it's just like any kind of an addiction. It takes more and more and more. And so I try to make sure that if somebody's got something they need to talk about, they can talk about it to me personally or to a counselor, and so that we're not introducing other people who are not aware of some of those things to worse materials. So it's a really, really treacherous subject. It's downright treacherous subject. We've got to handle it carefully. We're not going to get rid of it completely, but we can keep it under control. And in your own life, you can get rid of it completely. But, it's something we're going to constantly be dealing with. As I think about the children of Israel, I thought I was done with the subject. Maybe I'm not. Okay, when I think about the children of Israel, one of the problems was that the Canaanite worship was so sexually attractive. And if you were a worshiper of Jehovah, you had to take some of your grain, some of your animals, and give them. It was a demanding. Worshiping Jehovah was a demanding faith. It demanded something of you. It demanded something that was yours. Whereas the Canaanite religion was something that was a lot of fun. So what are you going to do in a society where you're faced with the worship of Jehovah and the Canaanite religion? And it's out there, okay? It's available. At the Church of the Brethren annual conference this past year, they had worshiping girls on the platform in front of the ministers. These girls were dressed in see-through skirts with very little underneath there. This was on national. You can probably go see it right now. If you go on the web and put up Church of the Brethren and annual conference, and it's so embarrassing. And people were saying it was immodesty. I said, yeah, it's immodesty, but that's not what it is. It's Canaanite religion. How do they think you get away with this? And then when I speak against it, I'm called disloyal because I'm speaking against a church situation that's over us and to which we're kind of responsible. No, I'm not going to be quiet about it. I'm not quiet. I was not planning to say that today. But that was completely wicked. Okay? Completely. And yeah, immodesty, okay, I understand that part. But the immodesty in a worship setting is not immodesty. That's devilish. Okay? That is literally Canaanite religion, Midianite religion, all those, and you can see how the children of Israel just got drawn into that. Well, some of us men were talking last evening after supper, and we were talking about some of the movie stars today, some of the ladies. Some of the things they're doing is actually worshiping devils. They're really attractive. They put on attractive shows, but they are literally worshiping Satan. And it's the thin edge of the wedge to get people's attention where the devil uses attractive people in order to do that. Okay? And it looks like something pretty. Okay, let's look at some positive things then on document 30, which you should have in front of you. What does it mean to be a Christian woman? What does it mean to be a godly woman? It means to be female instead of male. It means to be feminine instead of masculine. It means to represent unique aspects of God. When God first made people, he made Adam, and then he realized Adam was not complete, and so he took part of Adam and made Eve. And what we're told is that he made them male and female. And so when we think about God, we have to think that part of God is in us as men, but other aspects of God are in the women. Okay? Girls and women carry other aspects of God. And so it means to be uniquely created to be part of what God is. And so it's only in bringing us together, men and women together, and it doesn't mean you have to be married, but when we're working through situations, when you have friendships, hearing what the men have to say and hearing what the women have to say is seeing both sides of what God has done. It's really important that happens. It's important that men listen to the women. It's important that the women listen to the men. It's important that all of us are godly so that when we're speaking, when we're acting in ways that are godly. It means to be created in the image of God. It means to be the crowning glory of God's creation. If you look at 1 Corinthians 11, there's some really gripping words there. In 1 Corinthians chapter 11, we see that in verse 7, man ought not cover his head, for he is the image and glory of God. Okay? But the woman is the glory of the man. And so this is why the woman is so attractive to men, because God's given her a glory that's the glory of mankind. So the most glorious, beautiful thing God created was Eve and the daughters of Eve. And so it means to be the crowning glory of God's creation. Woman was the last creation of God. He saved her for last. And he made this absolutely beautiful creature. And a couple of places in the Bible, I wish I could have been there. One is Luke 24, when Jesus walks with the men on the way to Emmaus. And he opens the scripture and talks about himself. That was all from the Old Testament, I think. Wouldn't that have been amazing to listen to Jesus talk about the Old Testament scriptures about himself? But another time I wish I could be there is when Adam woke up and he saw Eve. And we don't really know what he said. The best we can do out of what he said was when he saw her, he says, "That's me." Okay? When he saw the cows and the donkeys and the elephants, he didn't say that. Okay? He gave them names. But when he saw Eve, about the best thing we can come to from what he says is, oh, that looks like me. Okay, none of the other creatures look like him, but Eve did. And so it's like, oh my goodness, how could anybody like that exist? And so there's this beautiful melding of two lives, male and female. And so it means this woman that God created was the crowning glory of God's creation. It means to be the glory of mankind. We just saw there from 1 Corinthians 11. It means to be the complementary part of God's plan for human creation. Some of the biblical passages where God expresses himself as feminine would be as a hen gathers her chicks. Jesus says, he looks out over Jerusalem and he says, how often I would have gathered to you. That's not a rooster, okay? That's a female chicken, okay? And so he uses these feminine characteristics. And God talks about himself sometimes with these feminine characteristics. Now I understand that the liberal theology has taken this way out of proportion, and so it's taken feminism and gone into the scripture and looked at some of the texts and saying, this means God's a woman. It doesn't mean God is a woman. It means God made men and he made women, okay? Paul says, I was gentle among you as a nurse cherishes her children. And so even as men, as we work with people, there are times we need to be very gentle. There are times as men we need to be very firm and strict and draw the lines straight. But there are times we need to be very gentle, and we need to know that as a nurse cherishes her children. So as a man, Paul as a man uses that kind of language, and me as a man, there are times when I have to do that and find that feminine aspect of God flowing through me. God tells us, I will comfort you as a child is comforted by his mother. That's very, very feminine. And so we also see, can a woman forget her nursing child and not have compassion? God says, neither will I forget you. That's very, very feminine. And then the one I like the best is in Hosea 13:8, where he talks about, I'm going to be like a bear robbed of her cubs. Now, most of us somewhere along the way were warned, if you're ever in the woods and you see a baby bear, you're supposed to go pick it up, right? No, not a good plan, okay? Because if mama bear is anywhere close, you could be in serious trouble, right? We probably heard this warning if we've had any exposure to the mountains and so on. Well, this is not a papa bear, okay? This is a mama bear. And so God is saying he's like a mama bear, and you do something to my cubs, there's going to be trouble, okay? So there's these really, really intense feminine concepts that come straight from God, okay? So we're not going to look at all these verses, but I just want to present them for you for your consideration. The prayerfulness of Hannah, as I was studying about Christian womanhood and godly womanhood, the prayerfulness of Hannah and how she prayed. She had this longing for a child, and God gave her a son, and he gave her a song. And what I've seen about women, godly women in the Bible, many times they had a song. And I think about my mother and grandmother singing as they went about their day. We didn't used to have radios we could turn on. Like I think it was Vance Havner said, we don't need music in our hearts anymore because we can carry it around in boxes. That was before the days when they had, the things you just plugged in your ears. So he's out of date now. But, people don't sing so much anymore. But I thought as I was studying about women in the Bible, how many times they had a song, and the songs are there. We're not going to take time to look at them, but I'd like if you would look at them on your own sometime. The faithfulness of Ruth, her song, and then her son. Many times God gave them a song, and God gave them a son. And so we have the courage of Esther and her commitment. You remember her commitment? She said, well, if I perish, I perish. And, the courage of Esther. The devotion of Mary, her song, of course, she says, my soul does magnify the Lord, and my spirit has rejoiced in God, my Savior. And then, of course, her son, Jesus, the most important son that's been born. The vision of Deborah, and very gripping passage there, her song. And the industry of Dorcas talks about it in the book of Acts, and her works. The faith of Lois and Eunice and the son Timothy. The determination of the Shunammite woman, and we'll take a look at that. That's on document 31 in 2 Kings 4. We all know Proverbs 31, 10 to 31, talking about the ideal for a Christian woman, the ideal for a godly woman. When you read that, ladies, don't get discouraged, okay? No lady can really quite live up to Proverbs 31. It's an ideal. And the truth is, let's turn to Proverbs 31. We should The truth is that Proverbs 31 is really not about the woman, it's really about a man, okay? When you look at Proverbs 31, the reason the discussion of the woman is there is because this is the advice that is being given to this man, okay? In Proverbs 31, the words of King Lemuel, the prophecy that his mother taught him. So we get some advice from a mother to a king. What, my son, and what the son of my womb, and what the son of my vows? Give not your strength to women, nor your ways to that which destroyeth kings. It's not for kings, O Lemuel, it's not for kings to drink wine, nor princes strong drink, lest they drink and forget the law and pervert the judgment. Give strong drink to him that's ready to perish, and wine unto those that be of heavy hearts. Proverbs 31, verse 7, let him drink and forget his poverty, and remember his misery no more. Open thy mouth for the dumb in the cause of all such as are appointed to destruction. Open your mouth, judge righteously, plead the cause of the poor and the needy. Now, she is giving advice to her son. Good advice. And so when you look at verse 3, she's telling him in Proverbs 31:3. So in Proverbs 31, we have the Proverbs 31 woman, but we also have the Proverbs 31 man. And typically we don't think about that. But this is about a man, okay? And it's about a man who's getting advice from his mother. And in verse 3, she says, do not give your strength to women. What does that mean? You're supposed to give your strength to one woman, not women. Okay? That's the counsel here. The counsel of the mother to her son is you give your strength to one woman, not disperse it out to all the women. Give not your strength to women, nor your ways to that which destroys kings. So when you get down to verse 10, she starts telling him, here's what you're looking for. Who can find a virtuous woman? Her price is far above rubies, on and on and on and on. She's telling her son, this is what you're looking for. Okay, these are the characteristics you're looking for. You're looking for one woman that God's going to provide for you. You're not looking to go out there looking after women. Okay, plural. So this is the message, I think, of Proverbs 31. And then when you get to the end of the passage, you will start reading in verse 28. We have the summary of this. Her children rise up and call her blessed. Her husband also, and he praises her. So as on this advice goes, this is the woman that God's chosen for you, this is the person you marry, and you need to praise her, okay? You need to recognize many daughters, verse 29, have done virtuously, but thou excellest them all. This is the way you're supposed to think about your wife, okay? This is what he's telling, this is what she is telling her son, okay? Favor is deceitful and beauty is vain, but a woman that fears the Lord, she shall be praised. More advice from a mother to her son about the kind of woman and how you treat your wife, okay? Verse 31, give her of the fruit of her hands, that her own works praise her in the gates. Don't shut her down. Bless her. Isn't that amazing? Sometimes we take Proverbs 31 and make it about women, and it is indeed. I'm not trying to minimize that. What I'm trying to show you here is that it's so important that we realize that this is not an ideal that women cannot reach. This is an ideal, but it's an ideal that this mother is giving to her son, so he will be choosing that kind of a person with those characteristics. All right, to be a loving wife, on page 2 of document 30, which means absolute fidelity to your husband. You need to meet the needs of your husband, his spiritual, social, emotional, physical, material needs. You need to defer to your husband's leadership. Be submissive. That does not mean passive. We've talked about that before. Be submissive. Do not usurp authority. This is a key idea. You're not supposed to be running the home. You're not supposed to be running the church. Too many cases, ladies are running the church. And men can only do what they get permission from their wives to do. So some wives, what do they say? I'm not the head, but I'm the neck that turns the head. So that's sort of not a nice way to go about this, but that's usurping authority. Have a gentle spirit. Be encouraging to your husband, to your family. To be a mother, If God calls you to this, give birth to children, nurture children, give spiritual direction, train them up, teach them, discipline, be a teacher, teach your children. Once again from Proverbs. And Titus tells us that the older women should teach the younger women. What should the older women do? They should teach the younger women to be keepers at home, to love their husbands, and so on. So we don't want to get caught in feminism, which is really hatred of men. That's really not consistent with Bible and Christian beliefs and Bible teachings. All right, let's open our Bibles to 2 Kings 4. This is such an impressive story. Such an impressive story in 2 Kings 4, 8 to 37, and also 2 Kings 8, 1 to 6. I call it a story with three questions. We're only going to spend maybe 10 minutes on this, but as you think about it, think about this woman. She's called a great woman in verse 8. We don't know exactly what that means. She might have been great in dignity. She might be wealthy. She's prominent. She's impressive. She's understanding. She has perception. She's welcoming. She has discernment. And she has perception here. And I try to teach some of these things when we do in our society class. I teach more about the roles of men and women, and we spend more time with women. And after I'm done teaching those classes, sometimes the women think they're in charge, okay? But that's not what I'm trying to say. What I'm trying to say, though, is that women have a very, very important role. Absolutely. And here you have a woman who's called a great woman. We don't know exactly what it means, but she has, first of all, in verse 9, a great perception. She sees a need, and what does she do with the need? She communicates it to her husband about the perceptions God has given her. And she comes in verses 10 and 11 with great hospitality. So what I do in this text, in the study here, is to list the great things about this woman. And she comes to her husband and says, let us. She's not out there being a maverick on her own. She has a husband, and she comes to him and has details. She goes out of her way to meet needs. In verse 12 and 13, she's not pretentious. She's satisfied. She's humble. She's not looking for favors. But in verse 14 to 20, the son that God has given her is taken away. And so not only does she have great vision, she also has great sorrow. And many times, that's a very important part of life. God brings to us sometimes great sorrow. The greatest joy that she had was taken away. But she's also a woman of great faith. She lays the deceased son on the prophet's bed, shuts the door. She has great courtesy in the face of trial. She has great hope in the face of loss. She has great stamina, her determination. She puts her goal ahead of her comfort. Probably the way she's traveling here is on the back of an animal, like a donkey. And she tells the servant, drive and don't stop unless I tell you, right? This is not in an air ride Bostrom seat, okay? This is not on, a heated leather seat in a BMW. The way these people traveled was on the back of a donkey on rough roads, and a servant with a pointed stick behind jabbing this donkey so the thing goes, right? And the servant is running, and she's got a blutzy ride here, okay? This is going to be a rough road. And all she cares about is getting done what she wants to get done. She's not caring about herself in this case, okay? She has great stamina, and she has great confidence when she's approached. And how is everything? Well, it's well. Is it well? So, she has great respect. She kneels at his feet. She has great anguish and sensitivity. She recounts the story. She has great persistence. No, I'm not leaving you. I'm staying with you. I'm going to see this through. She has great thankfulness. She bows to the ground. She has great commitment. She takes her son and goes out. She's not a victim. She's not a survivor, but she's victorious as she has faith in God. As she comes later, she's still looking for the blessing of God. And in chapter 8, there's wisdom. She has been away, and now they're back to the land. She accepts the counsel of wise men of God, and women do this. We don't know about the family at this point. Maybe she's a widow, but she is given. Her land comes back to her. God intervenes for her, and there's a great blessing because she has favor, both with God and with men. So if you look at verse 26, the lesson here, I think, is the questions that were asked her. I think if I would have been asking her the question, the first thing I would have said is, well, how's your little boy? But that's not the question. The first question was, is it well with you? Second question, is it well with your husband? And then the third question, is it well with your child? The questions, as I understand them in application here, would be the first question, it's important that it's well with you. As a woman, is it well with you? If it's not well with you, it's probably not going to be well with anybody. Even in the midst of all the pain and distress and problems of life, is it well with you yourself? That's the primary question. What is your spiritual and emotional health? Not narcissism, where you spend all your day looking in a mirror, but the real health of your body and your soul and your spirit. Are you taking care of yourself in the quietness of your own life? It's going to be difficult to be well with others if you're not well with yourself. And so the first question that comes from God here, is it well with you? The second question, is it well with your husband? In other words, is it well with the persons to whom you are responsible? That was the husband. Is it well between you and your husband? Okay. These are the people to whom you're responsible. Are you doing okay in those areas? And then number 3 in verse 26, is it well with the persons for whom you're responsible? Is it well between you and the child? So in both cases, are we respecting and honoring? Is there peace and love? Are we being available as women? Is there affirmation, approval, support, training, love? Are you fulfilling the responsibilities in each area of your life here? And so, I commend to you the questions. I commend to you, ladies, the questions. Is it well with you? Is it well with you and the people to whom you're responsible? Is it well with the people and you, the people for whom you're responsible? What makes someone great? Ask yourself those questions. Do you have boundaries in your life? Boundaries are to respect and honor. Mothers many times set the tone for the home. This man was busy with the harvest, and the mother's setting the tone for the home. Many, many times. The women set the tone for many situations in life, whether you're married or not, whether you get married or whether you don't. Many times your attitudes and words will set the tone for what happens. Men are busy, and many times because of the capacity that God's given the women in a situation, they can bring that capacity to the situation. In the early church, in the house churches, women were very prominent. Why? Because as they would invite local people in, they met the people at the level of hospitality. And the women provided the hospitality. And it was in that aura of hospitality that the men had the ability to speak and teach. Okay? And so many times it's not happening today. But we can still do that. We can still invite people into our homes. And we can still, as the women, can still be the ones who reach out with that hospitality. Set the sails for the children in your life. You as mothers, as God provides you with a family and you become a mother, if that's what God provides for you, you will be the earliest impact on those children. You'll be the earliest impact on those children. You will set their sails. Take responsibility for yourself and others as it's appropriate. Be submissive and meek. A quiet spirit does not mean being a doormat or being a martyr. Submissive is not passive, as we often say. Don't be selfish. Don't be controlling. Don't be manipulative. Don't be defensive. Don't forge your identity at the expense of other people. You're going to do it your way no matter what. Remember that as a woman, you're the crowning glory of God's creation. I truly believe that. On the basis of the fact that woman was the last creative act of God, on the basis of what we're told in 1 Corinthians 11, that woman is the glory of man. This is why women are used as objects, because there's glory there. There's a glory there that men don't have and will never understand. And so what we want to do, men, is to focus on the glory of God. And when people don't focus on the glory of God, then they start focusing on the glory of God's creatures. And woman being the highest part of that creation means that you're going to focus on inappropriately on women. But for the task for the women is to make sure that that femininity that God's put there is used in a way that calls the attention to God. That when somebody sees you, especially with the veil on your head, it immediately directs the thought, there's something different about this person. It's there to take the attention off of yourself and direct that attention to God. So the questions, are you well enough to meet the needs of the people around you? Are you perceptive of the needs? Are you able to see difficulties as tests and areas of growth? Make sure it's not a time for a pity party. Make sure it's a time when you're able to reach into a person's life and answer the question, is it well with you?